Hey guys, Selena here. Just popping in to let you know that the Fresh Health winner for the month of June is Save on Foods. If you've been to a few test stores in BC, you'll notice a huge Have Your Plate promotion with posters and dietitian recipes and tips and promotional items. So congrats to Save on Foods, and let's hope to see some more in those stores. If you'd like to nominate someone for the Fresh Health Award, simply email me at skarkash@cpma.ca.
Hi, and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. I am your host and CPMA's education manager, Jason Gorley. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to check out elearning.cpma.ca. That's elearning.cpma.ca. And there you can find out information about all the online training tools that CPMA offers. This month on Produce Talks, we're touching base with Dr. Amy Bowen, the research director at Vineland Research, to discuss how research shapes the produce industry, particularly in Canada. We touch base on some different types of research being done, the importance of consumers, and why transparency is key. Here we go. So let's start with a basic question before we get into the meat of things. Maybe you could tell us a bit about Vineland Research. Is it a government initiative, or is there some sort of connection to a university?
Vineland Research and Innovation Center is a private, not-for-profit horticultural research center. So we are independently run. We do apply for grants and get funding through both university and government organizations. Where we're located is in the Niagara Peninsula, like near the town of Vineland, which is where we get our name from. And the property that we're on has sort of a long history within agriculture and horticulture in Ontario. So the land was initially sort of granted to the province, the Agricultural Research Institute of Ontario, and they've leased it out to many people over the years, including University of Guelph, OMAFRA, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So while they were sort of all on the campus and still are on the campus, there was sort of a decline in activity at this site, and they really didn't want to sort of lose the research capabilities around sort of horticulture in the area. And so that's when Vineland Research and Innovation Center came to be. So we're a bit of a unique model in that we're independent, private and not-for-profit, but we work with universities and other sort of research organizations as well as industry stakeholders to do work to support the industry.
So you came in to fill that gap, but was it an industry initiative or was it something that was pushed by government?
Started off as a bit of an industry initiative where different people within sort of the area coming from different commodity groups across horticulture, so both on the edible and non-edible side, saw the advantages of having a continued presence in research in Niagara, where so much of it, is being grown. And so they put together a sort of a steering committee to rejuvenate the campus and look at different models of doing that. In order for it to be achieved, it had to get support from government. But it was, I'd say, spearheaded by the industry, supported by government, and then now we've been around for 10 years.
You said it was to keep kind of the research in the area. So does Canada have a good research capacity when it comes to this kind of thing?
Canada has research campuses, across the country, focusing in on different crops related to agriculture. So some focus more on the horticultural side, but you'll see these sort of across the provinces, Canada, and we still have a presence here in Ontario, of that on the campus where Vineland Research is, as well as certain universities specialize in, agriculture and horticulture. So those are all there. It's just, funding models change, access to research dollars changes. And so it's sort of, time for sort of a different focus and also looking for people or research that was going to directly impact, the industry. Our slogan is about, or sort of our model is about getting, acres in the field, shelf space in the grocery store. That's what's most important to us, is to see our research being taken up by the industry. So whether that's the grower or whether that's a packer, whether that's, a supplier or a retailer, so that it's available to the consumer to use.
So is this idea of a not-for-profit research center, has it been around for a while, or is it kind of a new and unique thing with Vineland?
Well, they've been around a while if you look internationally. Within Canada, it's a newer and more unique thing. One sort of very big example of it that we were a little bit modeled after is the plant and food research in New Zealand. So, there are models around the world that were looked at. The goal of Vineland is so that we can kind of really fill that void between kind of that sort of, academic, research and what the industry is needing. So we can kind of be in that sort of middle ground, pulling on the research, working with partners from universities, but then also working with private sector to really be able to get those results out to the industry and create value and impact. impact for the industry.
So really, you exist in the area of collaboration between academic and practical almost.
Exactly. That's exactly where we would be. So if you were to create a Venn diagram, we'd be in that little middle space, like trying to bring everything together.
What about internationally? Is there a lot of collaboration internationally between centers similar to yourself or with international universities and businesses?
Yes, and I would say more and more as we grow and get older. At the beginning, we were, I'd say, much more focused locally and, Ontario, and that's expanded sort of more nationally, and now is, focused more internationally. So what we're looking for is partners with similar research interests. We don't want to repeat what other people are doing. We would rather collaborate and add on to those projects. So we do collaborate right now, across Canada, and we also collaborate with organizations in the U.S., Europe, as well.
You meant, okay, so if you exist in that space where you're bridging the academic and the practical, who drives which projects you do? Does industry come to Vineland, or does Vineland go to industry, or is it somewhere in between?
Well, that's the one nice thing about being private and, independent is we can do a little bit of all of those. So sometimes if industry is coming to us saying, this is a big challenge, this is a big issue within our sector, can you help us address this? And then we create a collaborative research program around that. Other times, we might see a gap or an opportunity that we don't think is being sort of looked at, but we see as being sort of vital to continuing success and innovation in horticulture. And so then we will try to drive that on our own and try to sort of bring partners into that. And in other cases, it's sort of a little bit of everything. We also do contract research. So if somebody has a specific opportunity that they want done for their business, we can do that and provide the research results right back to them for their project, or we can do something sort of larger on a more collaborative scale. So we have a lot of flexibility, which is one of our big benefits.
So how granular do you get? For instance, I noticed on the Vineland page, you talk about looking for products that are abroad, but not necessarily in Canada. So if a company came to you, would you actually walk them through the steps to implement the product and get necessary permits or approvals?
It would be depending on the product. So yes, if it needed to be, that is something that we could be doing. So we do have a technology scout and grower outreach person on our staff, and so he very much works with people in other countries to help bring their opportunities and their innovations here, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we'll work with you. We won't necessarily do it ourselves, but we'll work with the companies or help advise them on what are the permits or what are the processes or what are the things that we need to be doing. And then we hope that on the flip side, if we want to sort of go into their markets, that they'll help us in those same ways.
Sticking with that whole idea of a new product, I think one of the really exciting things that everybody kind of looks to in the produce supply chain is kind of what's next. So right from the grower to the retailer to the food service, they all get excited about implementing a new product and seeing it really connect with consumers. So that starts with finding the right product to bring in. So let's talk about a little bit about the different ways that happens. So for instance, breeding programs, kind of a more traditional way of developing new varietals, but are there advantages and disadvantages with traditional breeding programs?
One of the things about bringing a new variety to market that I think is overlooked is how long it takes. Even a fast variety to market is probably going to take you, 5 to 7 years. So it's not something that can turn over overnight. Sort of a longer term variety, something like an apple might take, 18 years to get to market. So that's one of the things you have to kind of keep in mind when you look at sort of the different approaches and why people take them. I would say in terms of traditional breeding, what some of the advantages are, because we do have breeding programs at Vineland Research in greenhouse tomatoes, apples, landscape roses, and sweet potatoes, is that we can create new varieties that are adapted and are going to perform well in our local environment. So that's one of the things that can always be an issue is that, varieties that perform well in other countries or other climates, when they're brought, into Canada or trying to be grown in a Canadian environment, don't perform as well. So if we're adapting them here, we can ensure that they have agronomic, the grower traits that they need, the consumer traits that they need, and the disease-resistant traits that they need to be successful within our marketplace. So that's one of the big advantages of, having a local breeding program and having more sort of that traditional breeding program. One of the disadvantages is that it's very expensive, takes a lot of time and commitment and a lot of partnership, not only just to develop the new variety, but once you have that new variety, to actually get it onto the store shelves, get it in growers' hands so that they can grow enough, get it into the retailers and, get it into consumers' hands. So it's a very kind of long and expensive process, which is why, people look at other options too of how to bring a new variety in. having a successful variety that has that sort of local adaptation story attached to it.
And another way that Vineland brings new product in is product scouting. So this isn't necessarily like going to the field or inspecting the crops looking for pests, but it's looking for product from abroad and seeing if it'll work here, right? So
yes, that's exactly. So that sort of goes, that's sort of another way of looking at it. Because breeding is a long and expensive process, then there's all the, I guess, all the challenges of getting it to market. Another way of looking at it is what are varieties that are performing well in other parts of the world, and can we bring those here and see how they perform here? Which gives advantages to our growers. It gives the consumers what they're looking for in terms of a local product. It adds to sort of, the economy by not having as much sort of imports coming in. So what we will do is we'll work with, the variety owner to bring it into Canada, to test it here, and to be sort of the licensee to get that out to the growing community so that, the Canadian market has access to these great varieties.
And now it's time to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms.
Hello everyone, it's Kara here from Nature Fresh Farms. If you're looking for easy ways to eat healthy during the summer months, opt for a simple salad with greenhouse-grown tomatoes, bell peppers, and cucumbers. It's easy to throw together a salad for any occasion, whether it's a family barbecue on the deck or a quick snack after time spent at the park. As you spend time outside and get active this summer, don't forget to add healthy eating to the mix. For salad inspiration, check out our website at naturefresh.ca/recipes.
And now back to the conversation. Do you find that growers are willing to experiment with these types of crops, or I guess the longer you're around, the more they're willing to take a chance with it, right?
I think it's going to be commodity to commodity. So, something like an apple market is extremely competitive, but it also takes it a long time to switch over your varieties because you've got an orchard that takes, 3 to 5 years to establish and can last for 20 years. So if you're looking at something like an apple market, they're always going to be looking at the new things. They want to understand it, but they want to make sure that they're going to have sales for it once they put that investment in. So not that they're not interested in it, but they may be a little bit more apprehensive than somebody that's growing more of an annual crop that, they can experiment for one crop cycle. It didn't do so well. I might not look at that next year and go back to my old standards. So it's not consistent across the industry. And I would say even within a specific sector, there's people that are always going to be sort of more open to experimentation and trying new things.
And the other way is genetic engineering, right? I mean, that's kind of the newer way to really bring new varieties to market. So we've seen things like the innate potato and the Arctic apple get approval. Do you think that now that this technology is starting to enter the food chain, we're going to see more products like this?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think we'll see. I think, we'll see as these products get to market to see how they perform. If you look at the future and you look at, science and innovation, that is the future. But right now there's a lot of expenses, costs, regulation, trials and tribulations to get those products to market. So I think they will continue to come out. I think, in the next few years as we see how things like the innate potato and the Arctic apple that you mentioned, how they perform, we'll see how new products come on. I think another thing we have to be aware of is what do consumers think? How do we communicate? How do we talk about all of this to consumers? Because ultimately they're the ones that are making the decision at the cash register.
Would you be willing to share some examples of success stories that have come through Vineland from these types of programs?
Yeah, for sure. So some of the varieties that you can sort of see on the market that have been projects that we've worked on, typically with partners, would be the Cold Snap Pear, which is sort of Canada's first branded pear that was debuted actually at CPMA, I think it was 2 years ago. Sort of non-edible side, at Vineland we have the 49th Parallel Collection of Roses, with our first Rose Canadian Shield coming out last year now in 2017, to sort of go along with Canada's 150th birthday. Smitten Apple is an apple variety that was scouted from elsewhere that's been brought, tested, and now will be available to consumers. And then also out of one of our breeding programs here at Vineland as well is we have our first sweet potato variety, which will be coming to market in 2019, available to growers. So there's 4 examples that I can mention that just in the last couple of years Vineland's been working on, and we've got many more in the pipeline.
So there's room for research beyond just types of crops, right? There's a lot of producers looking at packaging to improve quality or marketing. So Can you maybe share any advantages to looking at packaging or packaging processes through a similar lens to really this research capacity?
I think it's extremely important. I think understanding the post-harvest storability, understanding the shelf life, understanding how packaging interacts with not only your product but also with the consumer is going to be key to being successful on the marketplace. So I think there's always room for more research around that area, and there's lots of lots of things that could be done to sort of further that area, starting with the consumer to the retailer, to the grower side of it. So I think a lot is focused on sort of getting that new variety, but really there's a lot of great new varieties that fail. So I think, really better understanding how to store it, how to sell it, how to package it, how to get it consumer facing, how to get people wanting it, pulling on it, knowing it by name, is going to be really, really key to future successes.
Well, and that's part of what you do too, right? You talk about your consumer insights panel and that part of the business. And from what I understand, there's a trained sensory panel and a consumer panel. Can you maybe tell me what the difference is and how they work?
Yeah, for sure. So here at Vineland, as I mentioned, we have sort of our breeding programs that fall more under our applied genomics group. We've got horticultural production that looks all around, how plants grow, testing new varieties, looking at sort of biocontrol, looking at pest and disease, that type of thing. We have a horticultural automation group that looks all about how we innovate and sort of reduce labor costs and those types of things. But another big piece of it we realize is that in order for a lot of these products to be successful, we have to understand the consumer. So that's the group that I lead here at Vineland, which is the Consumer Insights Group. And so what we're trying to do is really define and understand what is it that makes a consumer choose a product. So one over another, what are the drivers? Is it about flavor, taste, texture, appearance? Is it about region of origin, price, where it was grown, how it was grown? So all of that information is really, really important. And we use that sort of approach if the customer comes first to help us inform, new variety development, inform how we're going to position new products on the market. So how we go and do that specifically is we have here at Vineland, we have our sensory lab, which is where we have our trained sensory panel that comes in and they evaluate different products. So they don't tell us if they like it or don't like it. They tell us how it tastes, what are the attributes that you could use to describe it. So based on sweetness or acidity or say, like floral or fruity, like, flavors, crispy or soft textures, those types of things. So they're really trained to be descriptive, to be able to differentiate and to be reproducible in how they describe products. So an example would be, with our tomatoes that we're breeding for the Ontario greenhouse industry, it's all about flavor. So we've used our trained sensory panel to look at over 50 different varieties of tomatoes to help us define what are those different characteristics that would define flavor. So is it related to, the sweetness or acidity and those types of things. So our trained panel is really an objective measure of telling us how products are similar or different from each other and what would be the descriptors of those attributes that we could use to describe it. Because when we know that, we can relate that to the biology and the chemistry of the plant, which then we can relate to, the genetics of the plant, the production of the plant, and so we can use that to sort of help inform, breeding for new varieties and creating targets with consumer appeal. But we know that that alone isn't enough because people taste products and then they have favorites and not everybody likes the same thing, right? So if you think of apples, for example, there's so many different varieties of apples and everybody has, a favorite variety. So what we do with our consumer panels is it's really much more that subjective. It's much more about what do I like, what don't I like, and then we try to identify what are the characteristics or the drivers underneath that are driving that liking for those different products. So for our consumer panels, it could be anybody. So it's where our trained panel is a very specific group of people. Our consumer panel is we go out and we look for people that are consumers of that product. And we get them to tell us what they think about a product, how they would describe a product. And we find out all about them, like who they are, how old they are, how often they shop, why they buy the product, what they're looking for in products, to identify all of the sort of internal factors and also external factors that really improve our choice. So when we put both of those together, what that allows us to do is have an idea around preference, purchase drivers, and what's influencing liking or disliking, because that's important too. And then we have our trained panel, which then allows us to be very analytical in defining what drives those liking characteristics, so we can relate that back to the biology and physiology of the plant to help us select new varieties.
the train panel is their employees, and then the consumer panel is just like a market research panel, like a regular one. Is that what I'm?
It's a little bit different what we do. So we're not, we don't do marketing in terms of what we're doing. We can inform market research, but we're really collecting information that would be considered sensory science or consumer science. So what our train panel is, yes, they're part-time employees of Vineland, but they only come to Vineland to be on our panel. So they're not our regular employees because they know too much about the products and about what we're trying to do. So we want more of an unbiased panel. So we've selected them specifically just to be on our panel. Whereas our consumer panel, yes, we often work with, say, like a market research company to gain access to it, but we don't just ask them like simple questions. We try to understand more of kind of the psychology and sort of the underlying factors that make their choice for a product. So someone might say that price is the most important thing. Well, actually, price often is the most important thing. But a better example is someone might say, oh, organic is the most important thing for me, so I have to have organic products. But when you actually deep dive into it a little bit differently and look at their sort of whole value proposition of what is driving choice, we often find that organics is only there if, the price is right, it looks right, it's available at the store where they shop. It might not be the number one thing. So that's what we're really trying to do, is dig a little bit deeper to really understand what is making people's decisions around horticultural products.
Okay. So that's a little bit unique, but is it considered kind of an industry standard for this type of research center?
I would say sensory and consumer research would be an industry standard for sort of the food industry. Doing it on sort of fresh horticultural products like we do here at Vineland Research is a little bit unique. That's not as common. You'd probably see it more attached with a university. But I think it adds huge value to what we do at Vineland, being able to offer sort of that whole picture of understanding what is driving it. So if you look at very much like the processed food, process is an evil word, so let's rephrase that. When you look at the packaged food industry, yes, a lot of them would employ sensory methods regularly because they want to know when they're making a packaged good if I have to, adjust the sugar or salt or different ingredients or that type of thing. But we work on a product with a lot of sort of natural variation. So there's a lot of obstacles sort of in the way of sort of getting down to what's sort of driving preference. And so having that at an organization such as ours is unique and allows for a lot of collaborative opportunities.
So because you do a lot of work with food and people can get quite personal about food choices, I'm wondering how important is transparency to the work that you do, and how important is open communication in terms of food research?
I think transparency is the number one factor. So as scientists, as researchers, as doing anything that works with your food, you have to be transparent. So whether it's at the research level where we are, whether it's at the grower level, whether it's at the retailer level, people want to know where their food's coming from. They want to understand how it's made. They want to understand, what's important, and they want to be able to make those value decisions themselves of making choices of how they're going to feed themselves and feed their family. So I think the biggest mistake we can be is not be transparent about how new varieties are developed, how food is made, packaging options, all of those types of things. And I think the better connection we can have with consumers, the better off we'll be. I think the other thing that we really have to understand is that we're all experts in our fields, right? So whether you're a grower, whether you're a researcher, whether you're someone along the supply chain, you see it from a lens because you're in it like all day, every day, right? You live and breathe it, whereas the consumer doesn't. They're spending maybe a small time of their day to run in, get food, and sort of make decisions. So we need to make sure that we understand it from their perspective and that we're communicating in a transparent way that they understand. So I think that's where some of the hiccups happen, is we think we're being transparent, but we're really being technical and we're talking in terms that don't make sense to them or are misinterpreted. So if we can use sort of better kind of language and better understand how to communicate, really improves that transparency conversation.
So making sure that you're not using the jargon that kind of just gets thrown around the table.
Yeah, exactly. Making sure you're not using jargon, making sure you're not making things kind of, too technical, and making sure it's relatable to people that don't work in your industry.
Perfect. So just before we go, I wanted, and you touched on it a little bit with the roses, I want to know about the experience with floriculture. Can you kind of compare and contrast a little bit about working with, elements that will enter the food chain versus floriculture? How similar or different is the process?
Well, a lot of the processes are, similar. It's still a horticultural crop. It's got a lot of variability. I guess where the biggest differences come in is from sort of my area is how people sort of interact with the products. And, if you're doing, analysis on something that you eat, you're looking very much at, sugars, acids, flavors, texture is the biggest thing. Whereas you're looking at something that you're not eating, it's all more kind of about the visual, the fragrance, the characteristics, the external, I guess, sort of characteristics of the plant. So there's a lot of things that we can do that are very similar, but we always have to remember what it is that we're looking at. And, when we're working with sort of non-edible crops, kind of really think about, okay, what are the key things that are going to be important to, the consumer that we need to understand? And how do those relate, again, to sort of what that expert opinion is around working with that plant? So, that's something that we definitely see with roses, is that if you're a rose breeder or you're, a nursery grower and you work with rose plants and flowers and stuff all the time, you view the plants in a very different way than that consumer that's going to buy, a rose plant, once a year to put in their garden. So again, we need to make sure we can capture all of the diversity and sort of be able to bring that down to what are the key characteristics that we need in our products to make them valuable to the industry.
So that's all the questions that I have. I don't know if there's anything that you think I missed, or in terms of importance, in terms of research around these topics, or in terms of Vineland.
I think the only thing I would say is, while here at Vineland, we have products, we look at commercializing them. We rarely commercialize it ourselves. So generally, when we're kind of bringing a product to market, we look for someone to partner and to sort of take on that commercial license to be able to bring it to market. And that just goes down to sort of our capacity and our size. But that's where our, industry stakeholders, working with the grower groups, working with the commodity groups, working with the retailers, all along the research process are so key, because while everybody's super excited about the end product, we need to engage them earlier on in the process so that they're ready for the product and can help sort of guide and direct us and find those right commercialization partners for that product in the end.
And can I just, I'll ask one more question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but I'm really curious how everybody found their way into the produce industry. And I don't know if you'd be willing to share that or not, about how you got to where you are. Were you involved with produce? Did you always have a vision for being a sensory tester?
No, not at all. I actually ended up I started off knowing I liked research and wanting to sort of be in science, but I always thought I'd be sort of more on kind of the, molecular biology side of things. However, going through school sort of opened my eyes to sort of all sorts of other things and kind of left me confused. So then I started actually working in the hospitality industry, and that's what sort of led me to where I am now. So going from the hospitality industry, I was really interested in wine and how wine was grown. So wine is a horticultural crop, because you have to grow good grapes to be able to make good wine. So then I went to Brock University, which is how I ended up in, one of the ways I ended up in Niagara, and did my PhD there in enology and viticulture. So I was looking much more at flavor chemistry and how grapes are grown impacts the chemistry of the final wines that are made. And I went to my first industry conference, and I presented my results, and someone said, well, which wine tastes better? What do people like better? And I thought, that really is the kind of the key question here when you're working with a product that goes to consumers. So then I, within my PhD, tried to get a little bit more sort of sensory work in there to understand that. And then that's how I ended up at Vineland, was starting off as a postdoc to learn more about understanding the consumer. And then I've been here, 8.5 years now. So that's really where I've been focused, and that's really where I think is key. Because you can make 3 great varieties that, yield high, that, are disease resistant, that everybody thinks looks great, but if they taste like crap, nobody's going to buy them, or they'll buy them once and not again. So that's how I got interested in the produce industry. And I love it, because everybody loves to learn about fruits and vegetables, flowers and trees, because they're healthy and pretty and, part of sort of the joy of life.
And that's it. that's all that we have for you this month on Produce Talks. I'd like to thank all our guests for being part of our show. Our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms, your support is very appreciated. And I'd like to thank you for listening. Remember to check out elearning.cpma.ca to find out more about online training available from CPMA. Until next time, remember to seek out new knowledge, build your skills and abilities, and basically, never stop growing.
You will now be disconnected by the moderator.